So a very good morning, boys and girls, and welcome back to another video. Well, in today's one, we're going to do one photo from start to finish. So we're going to take it here at sunrise on Mappleton Beach using the OM System OM1 and the 12-40 Pro lens. We're just going to take a photo of this rock wall at high tide with a bit of a sunrise in the background. And then we're going to go home and we're going to edit it together. So one photo from field to final in one video. It's the first time I'll try something like this. Let's see how it goes. So this here behind me, this is the rock wall. This is what we've come to take a photograph of. Now, the sun's not rising directly behind the rock wall, which is a good thing. The sun's actually rising off to my left-hand side a little bit. But this is where the problem lies. See, there's not an awful lot of colour and interest behind this rock wall, so we can't really take a photograph of it from here. Otherwise, it's just going to look a little bit dull, and I'll be a little bit disappointed knowing that all the colour and everything is just happening off in the other direction. So I think what we'll do, we'll get down to the left-hand side of this rock wall and we'll shoot kind of facing towards it, getting the sun and the shiny colours and stuff and all that kind of interesting bits off in that direction. So let's hop down there and see if we can get something composed. The tide is coming in, so we're almost at high tide. Time isn't our friend this morning. Sunrise is, time isn't. So let's get down there before the tide completely swallows the beach and get a photograph composed. So now, as you can see, we've moved down onto the beach and, well, there's a little bit of pretty colour in the sky behind where we are now. So the photograph's going to look a little bit more interesting than it would if we was just up there. So essentially what I've done is I've chased light or chased colour. So I've moved position in order to get some of this in the photograph. So where I was originally stood, it was a little bit bland, it was a little bit boring looking. So we've just moved around and essentially we've just chased a little bit of colour. So the camera I'm using, OM System OM1, and it's got the live ND feature, and that's what I'm going to use today because long exposure photography is my bag. And well, we're at the coast at sunrise, so a long exposure photograph it's going to be. Now, the live ND means basically I don't have to open the bag and get filter kits out and attach them to the front of this lens. That takes time, that takes away from the photograph taking, and well, anything to improve workflow, I'm all for it. So we're going to use some of the computational photography features in here. So let's get something composed before the sun really comes up and starts stifling things. This light, this colour, doesn't always last all that long. So I have my spot. So we're going to shoot the rock wall, we're going to shoot down the rock wall, leading up to a little beacon at the end of it. But just behind me down here, there is just a singular rock just away from the rest of the rock wall. And I thought, well, that'll make for a fun little subject, just away from everything else. And it just gives the foreground a lot of interest. The colour is now starting to spread across the sky, which is brilliant, that's what I wanted to see. Obviously where the sun rises, that's where the colour tends to materialise first, and then as the sun gets a little bit higher in the sky, it does start to spread out a little bit more, which is what's happening, which is great. So now it's a case of just wait for the tide to come in a little bit more, so we'll get some more of that long exposure effect down here, and hopefully that's going to happen just as this colour reaches kind of peak intensity, which tends to happen just before the sun breaks the horizon. So fingers crossed we get a pretty sunrise and nice long exposure photograph that we can go home and edit together. So let me quickly walk you through the composition on the back of the camera. So we've got that singular rock just down here on the left rule of thirds cross point. We have the rock wall coming in from the right hand side and the beacon just off in the background. You can see in the sky all of that colour is just starting to spread this way a little bit. But what I'm waiting for down here, you can see the tide. This rock here, just a little bit ways in the background, the tide is roughly washing up to that bit. And I really want the tide to reach here where you can see there's a wet line of rocks and sand. The tide has been there recently, which is a good thing. It means the tide is coming up. Where the tide is now on the photograph, it's a little bit too far out for anything to really look interesting. So I think if we just give it a little bit of time, let the tide wash up a little bit further, then hopefully we might get something washing around this rock as the sun rises. But again, this is all a case of hopefully things work out all right in terms of timings. You can see the sun is just creeping in there. All of that colour and brightness is just spreading across here. So we may have to put a graduated filter on just yet. I don't know, but we've still got time. So let's just wait and see what happens. All right, I've decided to do it. We're going to throw a filter kit on the front just to be on the safe side. So I need to find my adapter ring, which is in here somewhere. There it is. So let's throw that on first. I think we're going to put a grad on and we're going to rotate it towards where the sun's rising, just to darken off that sky. I can see on the live preview on the front of the camera, on the back of the camera should I say, the sky is just starting to overexpose a little bit. So when we start doing long exposures, things are going to really start going wonky in that direction. So let's quickly just throw a grad on this. We've also got a polarizer on here, which should help just take some of the shine off these dark rocks as well, which is not a bad thing. Obviously, the water is now sloshing over to where I am, which is dampening the rocks on this side, which I don't really want. So let's throw a grad on. Bring that down, that's too far. We now rotate that in that direction. Rotate the polarizer again to take the shine off. And that should just bring and tame that sky in that top right hand corner. So there we go, 25 seconds, f7.1, ISO 200. I'm going to take the photograph now. Hopefully some tide wash is fine up the beach, but I just want to see if this grad has just eliminated all the overexposing in the top right hand corner of the photograph. Right, so we're going to go for it now. The colour's starting to fade a little bit, so I'm glad I got a couple of test shots in there just in case this doesn't work out as I was planning. So we're f8, 30 seconds and ISO 200. The sun is rising in, what, 12 minutes time. Unfortunately, the colours just started to fade off a little bit and the tide hasn't quite reached as far up the beach as I was hoping. We should still end up with quite a nice looking photograph. It's just not quite the one that I had in my mind, which is a shame, but I guess that's just photography. Tide and times, they don't always perfectly match up with what you hope for, but there we go, that photograph is taken. Now, I'm going to show you something. I've been photographing this way. I am done photographing this way, so I can now finally stand here and show you the rock that was the foreground interest. Now, because I'm stood here, there is big nasty boot prints in the sand. Whenever you're photographing along a beach with sand, my advice to you is always start further back and work forward and work forward and work forward, and just finesse your photograph that way, rather than going, right, I'm going all the way down here. Damn, we've got boot prints in the photograph. We don't want that. So my advice to you is do what I did. Start a little bit further back and just inch up towards the subject, inch up towards what you want to take a photograph of. And it just eliminates any kind of boot prints, especially in wet sand. So let's move this away from here now because, well, the tide's a lot higher on that side of the rock wall. It always is, and well, it's slapping against the rocks and the camera's a little bit damp as it is, and so is the bag. So, well, that is this part of the video done with. We have shot the photograph in the field or on the beach, because we're not in a field. Now we're going to go home and we're going to edit this together. And I'm going to show you the full editing process. All of the mind changing, all of the that doesn't work, this doesn't, it's all going to be in there. And I'm hopefully going to show you a trick or two as well. So let's get home and see what we can do with this photograph. So here we are. We're back home and we're on the computer. So I have the photograph loaded in now. It's on Lightroom. So let's start the editing process. So the first thing I can see is there are three distinct areas on this photograph. The sky, the sea, and the rock wall and the beach. And they're the areas that we're going to target individually and hopefully create something that looks really nice. So let's get stuck in and start editing this photograph. Alright, so as you can see, we've got the photograph on the computer now. So this is what I was talking about. So we've got the sky, the sea, and the rock wall and the beach. And they're the three areas that we're going to concentrate on with this photograph. Now, it would be really tempting to throw a preset in preset on and call that done. I actually quite like that result. Preset in preset was built around the sunrise, long exposure seascape photos, and it's kind of why it just works straight out of the bag. But let's try and avoid using that, and let's try and edit this ourselves. So the first thing we have, the sky looks a little bit overexposed. Well, it's not clipped, so we can bring some detail back in there. The rock wall and the beach look a little bit underexposed, so we could probably do with raising some shadows in that area. But let's first of all, let's start off with some global adjustments. So the exposure for the most part looks alright, so we'll throw a little bit of contrast in there, not too much, so we'll maybe go 10, 9 on that side there. And you see if we drop the highlights down, you see just what it does to that sky. So let's crunch them all the way down because that seems to bring out the most detail in that sky area. Shadows, this is going to the beach and the rock wall, this is mostly going to affect, so let's raise them up a little bit. There we go. I don't want to go too far with these because we can do this locally as well, so let's just bring out some detail. So let's just zoom in, see how that looks. That looks fine to me. Yeah, we haven't brought too much noise in there, so happy with that. So the whites, this will sort of look at the sea and the sky. So if you see the sea down here, this white patch here, and it's really going to start overexposing that little area of the sky there. That's the shadows. I do know what I'm doing sometimes, I promise. There we go. So if we just bring that up a little bit, we can always bring that area of the sky back, so I'm not too worried about that. But we'll just turn the highlight clipping on. See that little red splodge up there? That's the highlight clicking. So if you press this triangle button here, that shows you the areas of your photograph that are overexposing. But it's just a little splodge, and we can deal with that a little bit later on, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. Blacks we're going to leave alone, because if we take the blacks down, you see we'll just lose all of that detail on the beach. So we'll just double click the word blacks, and that resets that slider. Clarity, texture and dehaze. I don't like clarity all that much anymore. I tend to throw texture on instead. So we'll just throw a little bit of texture in there. And let's see what dehaze does. So just bring a little bit of texture in the sky. Don't go too mad with dehaze, otherwise things like that happen and nobody wants that ever. So we'll just go maybe 10 on dehaze. Vibrance, this will affect the colours. So you can see if we throw the vibrance slider up, it looks horrible. So vibrance and saturation used very, very tentatively. Contrast also adds a little bit of saturation in there as well. So if you've already added some contrast, maybe best not to go too mad with these. So if we add a little bit of vibrance to the colours, a little tiny bit of saturation as well. What happens if we go the other way? Actually, I prefer negative saturation and more vibrance. There we go, so that looks okay to me. So next we'll go down to the sharpening, denoise and all this stuff. Now, default sharpening on Lightroom is awful, so I tend to go down to 10, radius all the way down, detail all the way up. Now the masking slider, if you press the option button or the alt key, I believe, on Windows and slide up, that gives a little black and white outline. Everything outlined in white is going to be sharpened. So there we go, so just the outline of the rock wall, some of the pebbles on the beach, the horizon line and that little breaker. I don't know if it's like a marker just to show where the end of the rocks are, but I don't want to go too mad with that. So there we go. Basically, the outlines of everything is going to be sharpened, but everything else is going to be left alone, especially the clouds in the sky. If you start sharpening clouds, they look really, really ugly. So luminance, luminance noise reduction, I generally just throw 10 on there. Let's have a look. The backside illuminated sensor on this OM System OM1 that I shot this on is absolutely fantastic. You just gain so much more noise performance over normal sensors. There we go, so the shadows look fine. The highlights a little bit overexposed, but we can deal with that. And everything else is looking fairly spot on. So let's start off by looking at the horizon line, just make sure that's nice and straight, which it isn't, and 1K horizons, even a little bit, are a bit of a bugbear of mine. So let's go to the cropping tool and just rotate the image ever so slightly. And that looks fine to me, and just because I'm a little bit funny about this, we're going to put that horizon line bang on that top third line there as well. There we go. Not too much to worry about with the bottom part of this image in terms of losing things in the crop, so we should be alright with that. So it's time to start addressing these areas of the photograph like I spoke about. So like I said, we've got the sky which we can deal with, the water which we can deal with, and the rock wall and the beach. Let's start off with the simple one, which is going to be the sky. So select the mask tool and we're going to go to click sky, and Lightroom should hopefully create a really nice mask over the sky, which is really simple because there's just a straight line across there. It's nice and easy for Lightroom to pick that sky up. So I have the clipping, the overlay mask on. If I just move this over to this side out of the way with. So there we go. So if I turn this check mark on and off, you can see it just shows where the mask is. So we know where the mask is, it's on the sky, so we don't need it on basically. So we're going to start by dropping the exposure in the sky just a little bit. So that should sort out some of the clipping. But we don't want to go too mad. You see, if you go too mad, you get a really obvious, we've thrown a mask on here. So we're just going to take it to clipping. And then just watching this area over here, just when the detail starts to reappear in that corner, that's where we're going to leave that. So if we throw some whites in the sky as well, no, that's just going to clip, isn't it? About a little bit of contrast. We've got a little bit of contrast in the sky as well, just pop out some of them colours a little bit. And what happens if we crunch the highlights down even more? There we go. I'm trying to do this without leaving a very obvious line of exposure here, but we can sort that out in a little while anyway when we start working on the sea. So I think that sky looks a lot better. Now if you press this YY, you can see before and after editing. So on the left hand side here this is before, and on the right hand side here this is the after. Now seeing them together, the sky does look, it looks a little bit dark now. So if we press that again, that gets rid of that. So let's go back to this sky mask and just readdress this a little bit. If we looks a little bit dark. What if we take some of the contrast out? That's possibly a little bit better. What if we try saturation instead of contrast? A little bit of contrast, a little bit of saturation. There we go. Right, so now let's start drawing all over the sea. So I'm going to go to create a new mask. I'm going to throw the brush tool on, and I'm just going to move this mask's panel out of the way a little bit because I hate it. It gets in the way. So we've got a circle, and if I just swipe backwards on my magic mouse, you can see it makes that pen a little bit smaller. If you use the bracket tools on your keyboard, that also makes the circle a little bit larger and a little bit smaller, but I have a magic mouse, so we're going to do it that way. So first of all, we're going to try and draw over the area that we want to address here. So specifically that area there, and I'm going to come all the way along here. So if you notice on the brush tool that I'm using, there is a inner circle and an outer circle. So the inner circle is where we're really throwing this brush tool on, and the outer circle kind of creates a little bit of a feather, so it sort of blends off a little bit, so it's not really harsh, which is hopefully going to help with the drawing of this here. So I'm going to leave the exposure alone for now. I'll turn the overlay off because we know where we've drawn. I'm not going to start by going to whites. And there we go. If we slide those whites up a little bit like so, that really makes all of that sea pop. So if we do 100% on them whites, that really pops. But now if you look at the horizon line, we have some bleeding in of this mask. So if we go back to this mask and then hold the, I think it's the shift, no, the option, it's the option key, alt key on Windows, and if we just draw along that sea line on the horizon, that removes that mask there. But now it's left a really dark line, hasn't it? Let's see if we can just blend this in a little bit better. Just go a little bit into the sky. I'll grab the mask. What I'm doing now is I'm just trying to blend things in. Trying to find a point in the sky where it looks okay. It looks alright there. Let's work on this area a little bit. There we go, so I've kind of blended that in a little bit. So now I have some nice exposure on the sea. The sea's a little bit brighter. I've hopefully blended that into the horizon line well enough that you're not going to see the mask there. Now I can see it a little bit, but that's because I can see where I've been. But yeah, that doesn't look too bad. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to address this beach area down here, especially where this rock is, which I decided to use as the subject. And I'm going to address this with a radial filter. So I'm going to go back, create a new mask, and throw a radial gradient on that. And I'm just going to draw a radial circle over that area of the beach. I'm going to plonk it right over the subject. And we're just going to throw a little bit of exposure on there like so. Now raising the exposure, it does tend to wash it out a little bit. That's not too much of a problem, because if we just plonk a little bit of contrast back in there, take them shadows down a little bit, and we've got something that's starting to look like a subject. Now this next thing that I'm going to do is personal preference to me, but this photograph was shot at sunrise, and to me sunrise should have warm colours in there. So I'm just going to change the temperature of that radial gradient ever so slightly. I'm just going to warm it up using the temperature slider down here. 16 looks okay to me. I'm just going to stretch things out a little bit. There we go, like so. And what happens if we take the highlights down? There we go. So highlights down, contrast up, shadows down a little bit. If we take the blacks down, just throw a little bit of contrast in there, and then a little bit of saturation as well. In fact, we could even maybe purple this up a little bit as well. Got a little bit of purple in there, because it's just, yeah, let's change the tint. A little bit of purple just to mirror what's going on in the sky. So if I press L a couple of times, that gets rid of all of the interface of Lightroom, and we're left with just the picture. So, it's starting to look okay to me. If I press L one more time, that brings back Lightroom's interface. And the final area of this photograph that we're going to address is the rock wall itself. Now, I don't know how well this is going to do it, but if we create mask and select subject, let's see if Lightroom will detect the rock wall as the subject. It selected some of it, but not all of it. But in fairness, it selected the awkward bit around the sea, which kind of does me a favour. So if I select the mask and add to, and go to the brush, then we can just brush in the rest of the rock wall along here, which Lightroom missed out. Be very careful not to get too close to the sea. And I'm just going to go down here onto the beach area as well, just get some of that in there. If I just make this brush tool a little bit smaller, that's a little bit too small. Drawing around there. Very simple. We already know where the mask is, so we don't need the overlay on. Turn that off. Just raise the exposure of this area. Let's have a look. You see, if we take it too far, it looks really obvious. So we've gone to the point where it's really obvious, and then just start taking it back until it looks kind of blended in and somewhat natural. There's that. So this big rock here, there's a lot of highlight and white on there. So if we take the highlights back in this mask, does that help? It does a little bit. Well, if we take the whites back with it, there we go. Let's take the whites back, and there we go. That's got rid of all of that shininess on that rock. That rock top there looked a little bit too white. This one here, that looks a little bit better. So what else can we do to this photograph? Well, we've done a lot of local adjustments. We've done some global adjustments. Now if we start looking at the individual colours of this, so I'm going to go down to the hue, saturation and luminance panel, and with this little circular tool here, we're going to select the oranges and just slide up. You see, if we go mad, we get something that looks silly. If we go down, we get something that looks really washed out. So it's just a case of sliding things up until they stop looking natural, which is about that point, and then bringing back a little bit. So there we go. For some reason that's also taking the yellows back. So if we select the yellows now, there's a lot of yellow in that corner. Have a look, just to the point of clipping, that's there. And I think we're about there. So the final thing that I like to do with a photograph is put a vignette on. Now I don't like to use the vignette tool, I actually like to use radial gradients. I'm going to throw a radial gradient right over the middle of this. Excuse my Mac, it's going to start screaming at me now because I've got too many things going on at once. Just bring that in there. Just slide that up there. So I just like to throw it over the centre of the photograph. You see, this is the main area of the photograph in this circle where we're going to be looking at. So that's what we want to draw the eye to. So I'm just going to right click on this gradient, press invert, and you'll see the outsides of this very shortly should turn red. There we go. And now it's just time to start playing with the feather, which is this one here. There we go. So everything in the centre is going to be untouched, and the radial gradient is going to start between the lines, and then eventually as we get towards the outside, that's when it's going to be at its most intense. So if we slide back on the exposure a little ways, and there we go. There is my final photograph. So thank you very much for watching today's video. This one's been a little bit of a different one for me. I don't tend to show the editing process, but I thought it'd be a little bit of fun just to show you one photograph from taken to edited to final. So I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do give the video a thumbs up because it really does help the video and it helps bring new viewers to see my content. And if you liked it a little bit more than that and you're new here, you can always press the subscribe button down below and you'll see more Micro Four Thirds related nonsense from myself every single week. So until the next time, I'm just going to love you and leave you and say peace and goodbye. Let's throw a stroke on you for the socials.